She was granted a last-minute stay to evaluate her mental health, but that was overturned. The Associated Press reporting the 52-year-old was pronounced dead at 1:31 a.m. after receiving a lethal injection. This is the first time in nearly 7 decades that the U.S. government has put a female inmate to death. Montgomery was convicted of killing a pregnant woman and cutting the baby from her womb in 2004. The baby survived.
On January 13, 2021, at 1:31 in the morning, something happened that hadn't occurred in America for nearly 70 years. Lisa Montgomery, a 52-year-old woman, became the first female executed by the federal government since 1953. She was the only woman on federal death row, and her death made history. For all the wrong reasons. But this wasn't just another execution. Lisa's case divided the entire country. On one side, people saw a cold-blooded killer who committed one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. In 2004, she strangled a pregnant woman and cut her unborn baby from her womb. The victim, 23-year-old Bobbie Jo Stinnett, bled to death while Lisa drove away with the stolen child. On the other side, lawyers and mental health experts saw something completely different. They saw a woman so broken by years of torture and abuse that she had lost touch with reality. They argued that executing Lisa wasn't justice, it was murder. The Supreme Court had to make 3 separate rulings just to clear the way for her execution. Right up until her final moments, people fought to save her life. Even as the lethal injection began, the debate raged on. Was Lisa Montgomery a monster who deserved to die, or was she the most damaged victim of all? When asked for her final words, Lisa simply said no and remained silent. But her story speaks volumes about a justice system torn between punishment and mercy. What really happened in that small Missouri town? And did America execute justice or just another victim? Before we dive into this shocking story, please hit that like button if you're ready to learn the truth about Lisa Montgomery. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear this story. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true crime cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And if you feel you can't subscribe, let me know why in the comment section. This is the final hour. We're about to begin, so stay with us. Lisa Montgomery was a woman who carried many labels, and none of them told the complete story. To the world, she was known as a killer, the woman who committed one of the most disturbing crimes in recent American history. To prosecutors, she was a cold-blooded murderer who deserved the ultimate punishment. To her victims' families, she was the monster who destroyed their lives forever. But to mental health experts and her defense team, Lisa was something else entirely. They saw her as a victim, perhaps the most broken person they had ever encountered, a woman so damaged by years of horrific abuse that she had completely lost touch with reality. Lisa wasn't born evil. She was born into a world of violence, sexual abuse, and torture that started when she was just a child. By the time she was an adult, she had been diagnosed with multiple mental illnesses: bipolar disorder, PTSD, depression, and psychosis. Her brain scans showed actual damage from the beatings she endured as a child. So who was the real Lisa Montgomery? Was she a calculating killer who planned and executed a horrific crime? Or was she a severely mentally ill woman who never had a chance at a normal life? The answer to that question would determine whether she lived or died. And America couldn't agree on which version was true. December 16, 2004. The small town of Skidmore, Missouri, was about to become the scene of one of the most shocking crimes in American history. It started with something completely innocent: 2 women bonding over their love of dogs. Bobbie Jo Stinnett was 23 years old and 8 months pregnant with her first child. She was a dog breeder who loved talking about her animals online. That's how she met Lisa Montgomery, a woman from Kansas who seemed just as passionate about dogs. They chatted for months, building what seemed like a genuine friendship. Lisa told Bobbie Jo she wanted to buy a puppy. It seemed like a normal transaction between 2 dog lovers. Bobbie Jo was excited. She needed the money, and Lisa seemed nice enough. They arranged to meet at Bobbie Jo's home in Skidmore. When Lisa arrived that Thursday afternoon, Bobbie Jo welcomed her inside. She had no idea she was letting a killer into her home. What happened next was so brutal that even experienced investigators struggled to process it. Lisa attacked Bobbie Jo without warning. She strangled the pregnant woman with a rope, watching as the life drained from her eyes. But Lisa wasn't done. She had come for something specific. Bobbie Jo's unborn baby. Using a kitchen knife, Lisa cut the baby from Bobbie Jo's womb. The young mother bled to death on her own living room floor while Lisa cradled the newborn child. Then Lisa did something that shocked everyone. She drove home to Kansas and pretended the baby was hers. For several hours, Lisa lived in a fantasy world where she was a new mother. She showed the baby to her husband and neighbors, claiming she had given birth the day before. But her story didn't add up. People noticed she didn't look like someone who had just given birth. Meanwhile, Bobbie Jo's husband came home to find his wife's body and their baby missing. The small town of Skidmore was in complete shock. Nothing like this had ever happened there. Police quickly traced the crime back to Lisa through her online conversations with Bobbie Jo. The next day, they found her at her home in Kansas, still holding the stolen baby. The child was safely returned to her father, but Bobbie Jo was gone forever. The crime was so horrific that it made national news. People couldn't understand how anyone could do something so evil. The discovery of Bobbie Jo Stinnett's body sent shockwaves through the tiny town of Skidmore. Police had never seen anything like it. The brutality of the crime left even seasoned investigators struggling to understand what had happened. Within hours, the story exploded across national news. Headlines screamed about the womb raider and the baby snatcher. The crime was so disturbing that it captured America's attention immediately. News crews descended on the quiet Missouri town, turning it into a media circus. Police worked around the clock to find the missing baby. They knew time was critical. Every hour that passed meant the child could be taken further away. Investigators quickly discovered Lisa's online conversations with Bobbie Jo about buying a puppy. The digital trail led them straight to Kansas. When FBI agents arrived at Lisa's home the next day, they found her acting like nothing had happened. She was cradling the newborn baby, telling everyone it was hers. She claimed she had given birth the day before, but her story fell apart quickly. Lisa showed no signs of having recently given birth, and neighbors hadn't seen her pregnant. Under questioning, Lisa's lies crumbled. She eventually confessed to killing Bobbie Jo and taking her baby. The confession shocked investigators. Lisa showed little emotion as she described the brutal murder. The baby was immediately returned to her father and Bobbie Jo's family. The child was healthy and unharmed, which was the only good news in this terrible tragedy. But for Bobbie Jo's loved ones, no amount of relief could bring back the young mother who had been stolen from them. To understand what Lisa Montgomery became, you have to understand what was done to her as a child. Her story begins with horror that most people can't even imagine. Lisa's nightmare started when she was just 3 years old. She would lie in bed next to her 8-year-old half-sister Diane, listening to something no child should ever hear. Their male babysitter was raping Diane in the same bed where Lisa slept. This was Lisa's first introduction to sexual violence, and she was barely old enough to understand what was happening. When Lisa turned 11, the abuse became personal. Her stepfather, Jack, was a mean drunk who beat Lisa and her mother regularly. But the beatings weren't enough for him. He began raping Lisa once or twice every week. For the next 4 years, this became Lisa's horrible reality. Jack built a special room on the side of their trailer deep in the Oklahoma woods. It had its own entrance so he could come and go without anyone knowing. This room became Lisa's personal hell. Jack would rape and assault her there, often holding a pillow over her face to muffle her screams. When Lisa tried to fight back, he would slam her head against the concrete floor so hard that it caused permanent brain damage. One day, Lisa's mother Judy walked in while Jack was attacking her daughter. Instead of protecting Lisa, Judy grabbed a gun and pointed it at her own child's head. She screamed at Lisa, "How could you do this to me?" As if the abuse was somehow Lisa's fault. The horror got worse. Jack invited his friends over to gang rape Lisa in that room. These attacks would last for hours and end with the men treating her like garbage. Lisa's own mother joined in the abuse, selling her daughter's body to repairmen whenever she needed work done around the house. Lisa lived in constant terror. Her mother would duct tape her mouth shut to keep her from talking. She was stripped naked and forced to stand on the porch in front of drunk visitors. Her parents made her beat her younger sister with a board until the child bled. Jack even cut a hole in the closet so he could watch Lisa when she came home from school. Lisa found one tiny corner of the room where he couldn't see her, and she would curl up there for hours, trying to become invisible. Mental health experts later said what Lisa experienced was torture, the same kind of treatment given to prisoners of war and child soldiers. The abuse damaged her brain and destroyed her ability to think clearly or connect with reality. Throughout all of this, no one helped Lisa. Social workers visited once but called ahead to warn her parents. A doctor knew about the rapes but did nothing. Child welfare services were told but ignored it. Society failed Lisa Montgomery completely. The little girl, who should have been protected, became a broken woman who couldn't tell the difference between reality and her damaged mind. By the time Lisa Montgomery committed her crime, her mind was completely broken. Years of torture had left her with multiple mental illnesses that made it impossible for her to think clearly or understand reality. Doctors who examined Lisa found a long list of serious mental health problems. She had bipolar disorder, which caused extreme mood swings. She suffered from PTSD, the same condition that affects war veterans who have seen terrible things. She battled severe depression and anxiety that made daily life almost impossible. But the most serious problem was her psychosis and dissociative disorder. Lisa would often disconnect from reality completely. She couldn't keep her thoughts straight and would describe strange ways of thinking. When talking about her childhood, she would speak about herself like she was talking about someone else entirely. Her face would go blank, and her voice would become emotionless. Brain scans showed actual physical damage from the beatings she received as a child. The trauma had literally changed the structure of her brain. In the months before the murder, Lisa had several episodes where she told people she was pregnant, even though this was impossible because she had been sterilized after her fourth child. Here's the shocking part. Almost none of this information was presented at Lisa's trial in 2007. Her defense lawyers did a terrible job representing her. One had never tried a death penalty case before. The other lawyer, Fred Duchart, had a disturbing record. More of his clients ended up on death row than any other federal defense attorney in America. Instead of explaining Lisa's severe mental illness and childhood trauma, her lawyers came up with a strange theory. They claimed she suffered from a rare condition called pseudoyiasis that made her believe the baby was actually hers. The jury didn't buy this explanation at all. The defense presented very little evidence about Lisa's abuse and trauma. They called a few unprepared witnesses and mentioned some physical abuse, but that was it. Prosecutors mocked their efforts, calling it the abuse excuse. It was only years later, when new lawyers took over Lisa's appeals, that the full horror of her childhood came to light. Mental health experts spent hundreds of hours documenting her trauma and mental illness. But by then, it was too late. Lisa was already on death row. In 2007, Lisa Montgomery faced trial for the murder of Bobbie Jo Stinnett. The case was straightforward for prosecutors. They had a confession, clear evidence, and a crime so horrific that it spoke for itself. The prosecution painted Lisa as a cold-blooded killer who planned everything carefully. They showed how she had researched Bobbie Jo online, drove to her home with a plan, and executed that plan without mercy. The evidence was overwhelming. Lisa's own confession, the online messages between the two women, and the physical evidence from the crime scene. Lisa's defense team tried a risky strategy. They argued that she suffered from a rare mental condition called pseudociasis, also known as false pregnancy. According to this theory, Lisa genuinely believed she was pregnant and that Bobbie Jo's baby was somehow hers. The lawyers claimed this delusion drove her to commit the crime. The jury wasn't convinced. The pseudochiasis defense didn't match the facts of the case. Lisa had clearly planned the attack, brought a rope to strangle Bobbie Jo, and knew exactly what she was doing. Her actions seemed too calculated for someone who was completely out of touch with reality. During the sentencing phase, Lisa's lawyers presented some evidence of her childhood abuse. They called a few witnesses and mentioned physical violence in her past, but they barely scratched the surface of the torture she had endured. The presentation was weak and unprepared. Prosecutors dismissed the abuse evidence as nothing more than an abuse excuse. They argued that plenty of people suffered difficult childhoods without becoming killers. On October 26, 2007, the jury made their decision. Lisa Montgomery was sentenced to death. She became the only woman on federal death row in America. The verdict divided public opinion. Some people felt justice had been served for such a brutal crime. Others worried that the jury hadn't heard the full story about Lisa's mental illness and traumatic past. After her death sentence, Lisa Montgomery was sent to a federal prison in Texas that specialized in housing female inmates with special needs. For 13 years, from 2008 to 2021, this would be her home as she waited to die. Prison officials knew Lisa was severely mentally ill, so they placed her in a unit where she could receive psychiatric care. She was given medications to help control her bipolar disorder, depression, and psychosis. Mental health professionals worked with her regularly, trying to keep her stable in an environment that was anything but normal. Lisa's daily life was strictly controlled. She spent most of her time in her cell, with limited contact with other inmates. The isolation was hard on someone who was already struggling with mental illness. Her lawyers said she would often become confused and disconnected from reality, just like she had during her childhood trauma. As her execution date approached, prison officials became even more concerned about Lisa's mental state. They placed her on suicide watch, moving her to an isolated cell where guards could monitor her around the clock. They were afraid she might try to kill herself before the state could execute her. Lisa's condition got worse as the execution date got closer. She would have episodes where she couldn't think clearly or remember things properly. Sometimes she would stare blankly into space, completely disconnected from what was happening around her. The woman who had once been a victim of unimaginable abuse was now spending her final days in another kind of prison, trapped inside her own damaged mind, waiting for death. As Lisa Montgomery's execution day approached, her lawyers launched a desperate fight to save her life. They knew they were running out of time, but they refused to give up on a woman they believed was too mentally ill to be executed. The first delay came from an unexpected source, COVID-19. Lisa's lawyers argued that the pandemic made it unsafe to carry out executions. Courts agreed to postpone her death while they figured out how to handle executions during a health crisis. But the biggest legal battle was over Lisa's mental state. Her lawyers filed motion after motion arguing that executing someone as severely mentally ill as Lisa would be unconstitutional. They brought in dozens of mental health experts who all agreed Lisa was too damaged and disconnected from reality to understand why she was being killed. In a dramatic move, just days before the execution, a federal judge in Indiana ordered a halt to the proceedings. The judge wanted to hold a mental competency hearing to determine if Lisa was mentally fit to be executed. For a brief moment, it looked like Lisa might be saved. But the Department of Justice fought back hard. Government lawyers argued that Lisa was faking her mental illness and that she understood exactly what was happening to her. They pushed the case all the way to the Supreme Court. Human rights groups from around the world joined the fight to save Lisa. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights spoke out against her execution. 41 current and former lawyers signed letters supporting her case. Mental health organizations argued that executing Lisa would set a dangerous precedent. The political timing made everything more complicated. President Trump had resumed federal executions after a 17-year pause, and Lisa's execution was scheduled for his final days in office. Her lawyers knew that if they could delay the execution until President-elect Biden took office, Lisa's life would likely be saved. Biden had promised to end federal executions, but Trump's administration was determined to carry out the execution. In 3 separate rulings, the Supreme Court cleared the way for Lisa to die. Every legal challenge failed. Time had run out. On January 13, 2021, Lisa Montgomery was moved to the execution chamber at the federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. After years of legal battles and last-minute appeals, her time had finally run out. The execution room was small and sterile, with a gurney in the center where Lisa would spend her final moments. Prison officials strapped her down and inserted the IV lines that would carry the lethal drugs into her system. Witnesses watched through a glass window as the process began. Lisa appeared calm but disconnected, just as mental health experts had described her condition. She seemed to drift in and out of awareness, showing the same blank expression that had worried doctors for years. When officials asked if she had any final words, Lisa's response was simple and heartbreaking. She said no and remained silent. There were no apologies to Bobbie Jo's family, no explanations for her actions, no final statements about her life. Just one word that summed up a lifetime of being unable to express herself. At exactly 1:31 a.m., Lisa Montgomery was pronounced dead. She had become the first woman executed by the federal government in 67 years, and at 52 years old, she was gone. Lisa's lawyer, Kelly Henry, was devastated. She released a statement saying that everyone who participated in the execution should feel shame. Henry called Lisa a damaged and delusional woman and said her execution was far from justice. The government had stopped at nothing to kill a woman who many believed was too mentally ill to understand why she was dying. Lisa Montgomery's execution sent shockwaves across America, dividing the country on questions of justice, mental illness, and the death penalty. Bobbie Jo Stinnett's family and friends felt that justice had finally been served. They argued that no matter what Lisa had suffered as a child, nothing could excuse the horrific murder she committed. To them, Lisa was a killer who deserved to pay the ultimate price for taking an innocent life and destroying their family. But legal experts and mental health professionals saw something very different. They argued that America had just executed one of the most damaged and mentally ill people ever put to death. Sandra Babcock, who had defended hundreds of death row inmates worldwide, said she had never seen a case like this. Someone who had endured such extreme torture and abuse. The execution reignited the national debate about mental illness and capital punishment. Critics argued that executing severely mentally ill people was cruel and unconstitutional. They pointed to Lisa's brain damage, her multiple psychiatric diagnoses, and her complete disconnection from reality. Lisa's case also highlighted problems with the death penalty system itself. Her original lawyers had done such a poor job that the jury never heard about the worst abuse she suffered. Many wondered, would the outcome have been different if they had known the full truth? Historically, Lisa's execution was significant. She was only the 16th woman executed since the death penalty resumed in 1976, and the first by the federal government since 1953. Her death marked the end of an era and raised questions about whether America should continue executing its most broken citizens. The debate over Lisa Montgomery's legacy continues today. If Lisa Montgomery's story shocked you, please like this video and share it with others who need to understand the complex truth behind this case. Subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that explore the darkest corners of human nature and the justice system.